known each other, I don't know how long now. It's been 5 or 6 or 7 years. I don't know. But when we did a series of podcasts called Integral Recovery, go check them out. Anyway, it was a total spiritual experience, inspiration to do that. But there's nobody on the planet that I would recommend for leading this Vitality Project than Bob. He's the complete package. He's been through his own stuff. He's been broken on the shoals of life, and he's come back. His great compassion, as I think you can just feel from him, his great wisdom, and he's smart as hell. He's also a scholar, and he's also tough enough, more than tough enough, to tell you the truth when you need to hear it, even if it's not what you don't want to hear. So I think working with Bob in this Vitality Project could be one of the best moves you've ever done in your life, and I'm just honored to be able to promote it and to be here and give my bit to support this project.
I'm here with my dear friend, John Dupuy. It's great to see you, brother John. John and I have been working together for the last half a dozen years. And John, you know that you're central inspiration to me in my own recovery process. Your book, Integral Recovery, and who you are as a person, and for that matter, your wife, Pam, and for that matter, your dog, Lucy. You guys have been family to me and to my whole recovery process. And I'll tell you, John, what we're doing here at the Vitality Project, and I just want to dialogue with you for a few minutes, is that you know that I've been immersed in my own recovery for the last 10 years and then in work in addiction recovery here locally in Southern California for most of that time. And one of the things that I see, John, and you can relate this to your own experience across your whole career too, is that a very typical scenario is people will come out to California for treatment in an addiction treatment facility, typically 30 days, sometimes longer, but typically 30 days. And many of them have come to Jesus experiences. I mean, literally they turn their lives around, they're able to get sober, the light shines in darkness and all it seems good. They go home to Topeka, Kansas or Fort Worth, Texas, or wherever they're from, and they relapse in 2 weeks. And generally the instructions that they leave treatment out here with, John, is go home to wherever you're from, find a local meeting, typically a 12-step meeting, almost exclusively that, get a sponsor and good luck with that. And for people for whom that see them again, but for people that doesn't work in significant, they relapse, it's just enough support. And if we're lucky, they come back, John. If we're not lucky, they die. So it's really serious. I mean, I know you know this. But in the context of the work that you've done, John, your whole career, and especially in the last 10 years, you're writing this book and all the work that you've done in integral recovery, it's clear to me that two things are missing. And I'll summarize this and then I want to interact with you. Two things that I'm very interested in Vitality Project is to follow up on something that's missing, I think, in traditional treatment, including the traditional self-help support groups, is that they're too single-focused. You know, my background's in psychology, as you know, and I have a lot of interest in medicine and medical health as well. And where you have a program that identifies addiction as a spiritual problem with a spiritual solution, I don't think either you or I would disagree with that. We both care a lot about spiritual practice. And as our dear friend Ken Wilber would say, no one has the capacity to be 100% wrong. It's just that it's partial. It's just that it's partial. Right. And so I'm very invested while I'm working with clients here locally, but also invested in providing support for them when they go back home to address the emotional relationship factors, which are more in the realm of psychology, and for that matter, the body and the brain, which is more in the zone of the medical sphere. And most of the clients that I see, John, when they go back home, they can't afford to see a psychotherapist. They can't afford to see a psychiatrist. That's just not an option. They've lost their jobs, they've lost insurance and so on. So one of the wishes I have is to provide an informational web of support for people as a transition when they go home again. That's a piece of it. The second piece that's really near and dear to me, and John, this is right in the middle of all that you're committed to, is that I'm very interested in a practice-oriented recovery. And so people leave here, they have a powerful experience, they go home, they don't have anywhere near what they need in terms of day-to-day practices to reinforce what they've learned and to continue the transformation that began here. So that's a starter, John, for what we're trying to do online. It's limited because I'd like to see every person that I see face to face, you know, in the flesh, but at least online, it's affordable, it's accessible, and I'm committed, as you are, John, to holistic treatment with a map. I mean, it's just with practical day-to-day guidelines for what people can do. So that's a start, and I'd love to have you interact with me, brother. You are my brother in arms in all of this, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, a lot to say, but first of all, you're dead on. And I worked in the recovery field for many years, both in buildings and in wilderness recovery programs. And the most terrifying thing was to have to release your beloved students and go home. And you know, I mean, traditionally the wisdom was, and it's not a bad idea, but this is what there was: do 90 meetings in 90 days and get a sponsor, and good luck, you know, which is 100% better than nothing. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, I mean, and God bless AA and 12 steps, and it's helped so many millions of people over the years, but it doesn't work all the time for all of us, because it, as you were saying, it's partial. It leaves out other stuff that they didn't know about in 1936 or whenever the big book was published. And it's just essential. And when you have a supportive community, as Bob, that you're starting online, which is, you know, thank God. I mean, because we can't even meet in person anymore. This is being recorded in the midst of this pandemic, you know, freak out that we're going through. Very scary for a lot of people. But you can meet online. And when one gets involved in a life of practice, in other words, meditation, going to the gym, taking care of yourself, it becomes really good. First of all, your brain chemistry is doing really nice things, and you feel really good, and you get really inspired. And when you take drugs and alcohol out of your life, there's this huge vacuum, you know, and if it's not filled with something positive and challenging and inspiring, and something that makes it worthwhile getting up in the morning and putting on your pants and drinking your coffee and staying sober one more day, why are you doing that? Well, I think the life of practice, or we call it integral practice, is a wonderful antidote. And not only do you become a sober person, but you become an exemplar of what it means to be an actualized human being as you work on yourself. And you're not just some sick person trying to get better. You become an extraordinary leader in whatever your field is, and you begin to shine, and you begin to give, and you find your gifts, and you find your path. And that's what makes life worth living. And
absolutely, that's what we're really trying to focus on here, is becoming Dr. Bob and I were talking about it, I heard somebody say it once, becoming a 24-hour person, meaning that at any given time during a 24-hour period, a friend or family member could call you, and you would be 100% available and 100% able to help them. Never having to worry about if you're not sober, incapacitated, or really becoming a participating, the guy referred to it as a 24-hour person. And that's something that's always stuck with me for sure.
Yeah, I like that a lot. John, it's why we picked the term for this, the Vitality Project. You and I've had many, many conversations about living your life with some grit, with some courage, with some commitment. And I picked the term vitality for two reasons. One is that one of my favorite poets, D.H. Lawrence, has a poem called Vitality that's been a part of my life for about 30 years. And it inspires me to do what Jason just talked about, which is to be ever more courageous in living life 24 hours at a time. The other piece is I have a book, I actually have it on my desk, and it inspires me. It's a book just called Forms of Vitality. It's by Daniel Stern. He's my favorite psychological writer. He's a recently deceased psychiatrist. He taught in Switzerland. John, you'll love this. John speaks German fluently. He's taught in Switzerland at the University of Geneva, and in the US at Columbia. He had a twin appointment. But he has a book called Forms of Vitality, and he's talking about the same thing. How do we live as dynamically as possible? One of the issues for me in my own early recovery, John, was the term sobriety. You know me, John, as a 7 on the Enneagram. The term sobriety would not be the most inspirational word you could pick for somebody like me who wants to live life with kind of on the passionate edge, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so vitality for me is a very inspiring kind of at least complement to the word sobriety. I look at my sobriety, literal sobriety, from addiction to substance, as a handmaiden to living a full, vital life. And so vitality has become the metaphor for what we're talking about right now, living 24 hours a day, full on committed, full on presence as much as possible. And it's across all domains, body, mind, and spirit. One of the pieces, then I want to come back to you, John, one of the pieces that comes up for me when I introduce what I learned from you, John, in our conversations, when I introduce this to clients initially, they go, wow, Dr. Bob, that sounds really burdensome. And I go, well, it's actually the opposite of it. And let's talk about that. I think early on, especially when you're in the dregs of early, post-acute withdrawal syndrome, getting out of bed feels burdensome. But I'm really aiming for people to be liberated. And I use myself as a model for that. I'm happy to be alive, 12 cylinders firing. Thank you very much. But John, I'd love you to speak into this. I don't know of anybody who's more of an exemplar, who carries more of a commitment to daily practice than you, my dear friend.
Yeah, well, I don't know if we've talked about this, but what I do in the world, I'm the CEO of iAwake Technologies, and we create brain entrainment tools that allows step 11 to rock. In other words, step 11 is sought through prayer and meditation to increase our conscious contact with God, seeking only his will or her will, and the power to carry it out. Yes. And I love that. That's one of my favorite step, just because I love meditation and love prayer. Anyway, but these tools help inspire meditation. Besides just being torture and trying not to think. It's not easy. You end up thinking about not thinking. It just goes on and on. But and the other thing, I wrote this book called Integral Recovery, where I was looking for a new model for treatment and recovery from addictions and compulsive disorders that would bring everything together that needed to be included. And I use a scaffolding of Ken Wilber's Aqua Map. If you guys haven't heard of that, check it out. It's quite brilliant. So anyway, that's kind of what I bring to the party. And what was the question?
The question is, John, is how do you put, Ken Wilber's model, all quadrants, all lines, all levels, all stages, all types, as people can read about that online for sure. But how does that look in day-to-day practice? And I think for me, you've modeled that in my life as much as anybody I've ever known, John.
Yes. And, addiction was not my thing, but clinical depression was. Mm-hmm. And it's always clear to my students, that's, drinking, blah, blah, blah. That's not my big problem, but depression and suicidal depression was and is. And so I was working with people in recovery, early recovery and wilderness programs. And I was trying to find ways of fixing them or helping them to meditate, to have a life, to be okay when they left the beautiful, expansive confines of the wilderness. And I started trying to figure out how to help them. And lo and behold, what I was really doing, among other things, was helping myself. So when I discovered the life of practice, in other words, it's pretty intuitive. You got to take care of your body, okay? And you want to get your body functioning is at its highest balanced, healthy level that you possibly can, which is exercise, diet, blah, 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 all that stuff. You want to deal with your emotional interior, your wounds, maybe the things that started you using in the first place. Go back and look at those and process those. Feel the pain, cry the tears, get the support you need to get through that. The brain entrainment technology is very effective, saved my life. And a spiritual practice, which means a lot of things. I mean, and Bob, you could probably speak on this more than I, because you're quite the scholar, but it is a practice whereby we go into the deepest part of ourselves on a daily basis, and whatever we find there, call it spirit, call it God, call it Buddha nature, call it wisdom, call it higher self. It's language for the same thing. And we really have to come into relationship with that, with what our lives mean on the big, on the big picture. All right. And what it means on an individual level. What's your goal and what's your soul mission in this lifetime? But when we find that, besides being very instructive, it really helps us, because, when you get, well, why the fuck shouldn't I have a drink? Well, because this is what you're here to do, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and is this going to help you accomplish what you need to accomplish? Is this going to make you the father you need to be, the lover you need to be, the husband you need to be, the friend you need to be, the leader you need to be, the creator you need to be? The answer is absolutely not.
Yeah.
So just don't do it. And the cravings will dissipate, right? Because they come and they go, and you make it through it, then thank you, God. And you're a little stronger and you're better to deal with it next time. And the more you have those experiences, pretty soon it becomes second nature. And at some point, for many people, the desire to use just goes away.
Yeah. That's the grace of it all. John, I love all that you're saying. I want to respond to you and then ask you a question. I love your emphasis on the 11th step, you know, and I have to tell you, when I first got into the 12-step programs and they got to the 11th step, I thought I had come home, prayer and meditation. And then what it turned into, it was like a 30-second, no, it wasn't 30 seconds. It was a 10-second moment of silence at the end of meetings. That's what was meditation. I was, you gotta be flipping kidding me. And while I've meditated for most of my adult life, and it didn't keep me from addiction, that's for sure. It certainly was going to give me a leg up out of addiction. I was clear about that. And if anybody has mined the wealth of meditative traditions, it's you and in your company, I Awake. So therein lies a question for you, John, which is, can you say more about brain entrainment in terms of meditation and how that might serve our population here at the Vitality Project? Most of them won't be aware of I Awake. Many of them will be aware of meditation, but not of I Awake.
Yeah, well, brain entrainment meditation allows us to supercharge the meditation process. So instead of sitting there and, you know, for years watching your breath or whatever, which can be really hard and really time consuming. And for most of us, it takes so long that we drop, you know, we're not seeing
don't do it
after a year. Like, okay, why should I do this anymore?
Yeah.
And that's really hard. So what this does, I'll give you the real, we added a bunch of technologies and we keep improving it, but they started out this binaural beats and brain entrainment technology when they discovered that if you took one beat in this ear, say 100 beats and 110 here with headphones, the brain did not know how to split the difference. So, well, it did know how to split the difference, but it didn't know how to cope with that. So it coped by splitting the difference at 5 hertz. So by arranging these sounds, in the early days, the signs would be really irritating stuff. But anyway, we found how to use music and beats and nature sounds, all kinds of things that are really beautiful. And the brain goes to, say, 5 hertz, which is a deep theta or delta meditative states. So instead of having to join an ashram or get a guru or go off in a cave and meditate for many hours a day and go through all that torture, you can put these things on. And in the first few minutes, you've been transported to a brainwave state that takes people unaided years, maybe never, to consistently be able to achieve. And so what does that do? Well, you start feeling the results of transformative meditation right out of the gate. And it's all that's really inspiring. So instead of, the compulsive thoughts and this and that, and just do these deep states. And I had a kind of a vision in my mind one time as a submarine, and the sub goes up and it's like, there's the storm or tsunami and all this stuff going on. Well, just go down about, 500 meters, which I think submarines these days can actually achieve, and everything's calm. So we learn that no matter what stress and stuff is going on in our lives, there's a place inside of us, a place where we find our purpose, our meaning. We find God, if you will. And again, I'm not hung up on the language, but that sacred place from which we find our wisdom. Yes, and we find spirit, and we find out who we are, and what we've always been and always will be at the deepest level. And we find out, if we continue this journey, what we're here to do. What is your soul mission? And once you kind of get those things squared away, all this staying sober shit gets a lot easier.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And it starts to become less and less important because now you're on the road. Yeah. And can you drink? No. Why? Because you're an alcoholic and you'll wreck your life. if if you keep using it. It's really simple. I mean, alcoholics and addicts are just like all of us. They just can't use drugs or alcohol safely because you lose control.
Yeah.
So really you have to, all right, that's first step, stop doing that. But then the really exciting part is finding your path, finding your life, finding your purpose, and beginning to manifest it in the world. And it really feels that when we've kind of done the work and kind of surrendered, our ego stuff to the nobler and bigger cause, that it just changes everything. Life is better and deeper. It's not easy. We still suffer. We still go through stuff, but there's just a different quality. Instead of just ignorant suffering, as when you're using and abusing, it's noble suffering, because all our pain and our hardship can ennoble us if we stay present with it. And through the practices that we can do that. And what was chaos before transforms into peace and to compassion and wisdom. And remember, when you're suffering, you're not suffering alone. You don't think anybody else on the planet's going through what you know. We're all going through this stuff at the same time. And so it helps open our hearts and open our minds and gets us on the path.
That's what I think a lot of people, I know myself included in a lot of the members, Dr. Bob brings that kind of practical. It's not just, there is something more. I mean, sober, just even the word sober is like a boring term. It's just kind of, even just the word itself sucks, for lack of a better term, So yeah, that's what I know, a lot of feedback from members is with Dr. Bob. He's engaging. It's not like, okay, you're an alcoholic, your life isn't over. It's like your life is beginning and can be so much better. It's like somebody who has sun sensitivity. You don't go out in the sun without sunscreen, or you just don't go out in the sun at all. It's the same thing with an alcoholic. It's just, we were just made slightly differently. And I think that's what Dr. Bob emphasizes, is that life can be so much more in the midst of sobriety from any addiction, whether it's drugs or alcohol, sex, gambling, and it doesn't really matter. Everybody's addicted to everything nowadays. And I think that's where people really engage with him, where it's not just, hey, you don't believe in God, this pen is your power and, your higher power, and let's just roll with that and give it all to your pen and don't drink today. It's no, yes, in the last 60 years, we've learned so much about the brain and how it works. And, when you think, hey, I want to drink, you really don't want to drink. You're pissed off or stressed out about something else. And that's just the shortest path of resistance to ease the pain of your brain or the stress. And, once you start learning about that and recognizing that, like you were just saying, John, then sobriety is almost like an afterthought of what is in front of you. It's once you focus on, or once you learn what needs to be in front of you, then I don't want to say not drinking or using is easy, because it's different for everybody, but it sure as hell becomes a lot easier.
Yeah. Thank you. Well said, Jason. John, thank you as well for all that you said. Let's have one last nugget of wisdom before we wind down. Love to hear from you.
I'm sending this out to all our IOA lists and everything, and no financial gain in me, because I believe Bob and you and the work that you're doing. And
thank you, John.
We've known each other, I don't know how long now. It's been 5 or 6 or 7 years. I don't know. But when we did a series of podcasts called Integral Recovery, go check them out. Anyway, it was a total spiritual experience, inspiration to do that. But there's nobody on the planet that I would recommend for leading this Vitality Project than Bob. He's the complete package. He's been through his own stuff. He's been broken on the shoals of life, and he's come back. His great compassion, as I think you can just feel from him, his great wisdom, and he's smart as hell. He's also a scholar, and he's also tough enough, more than tough enough, to tell you the truth when you need to hear it, even if it's not what you don't want to hear. So I think working with Bob in this Vitality Project could be one of the best moves you've ever done in your life. And I'm just honored to be able to promote it and to be here and give my bit to support this project.
Thank you very much.
You bring tears to my eyes, dear brother. Thank you so much. I got to finish one thing as a postscript. John is an animal blues guitarist, and I'm a drummer. And when we get together, sparks fly.
Ecstasy without drugs.
So you guys, what do you say? You drum like a banshee? He guitars or strums like a banshee?
Oh boy, at least like a banshee. Yeah. Thank you, John. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, guys.